Okay, here we go.
Okay, these are some slides that I'll actually present at the 15th International Permaculture Convergence in Taiwan on November 30th. And if it's okay, I'll just keep them in this format. It's easier to navigate the slides, but if anybody wants me to, I can change the format if needed and share the slides later. So the Climate Foundation, we're working on understanding what marine permaculture value chains and opportunities represent, and how can we work towards regenerating healthy climate in our lifetimes. We were very grateful to get the support of the Elon Musk X Prize for Carbon Removal Milestone Award, but fundamentally we are focusing on food security, not only for humanity, but also for millions of species that can't vote. Sustainable livelihoods is part of that, especially on the coastline. And finally, we look to measure the carbon removals, the carbon fixation of these regenerative interventions. And I might say, if we can refine measures of ecosystem complexity, I would like for us to be doing that as well, because I think we don't have adequate ways to quantify the biodiversity of our ecosystems, and we need to improve on those. I had mentioned that we'd lost 95% of the Australian macrocystis kelp forest in eastern Tasmania. Similar problems have occurred from the shores of California and Canada all the way to Western Australia. Here in Indonesia, we've seen production losses of 60% during the last marine heat wave, and it presents a critical crisis, particularly in subtropical and tropical latitudes where the supply of deep nutrients is being cut off by the ocean warming that's been taking place. In a nutshell, our solution of marine permaculture, this is a 1,000 square meter, quarter acre ring drone shot taken from a satellite with a notable Pacific green sea turtle enjoying the habitat under the platform. And these platforms raise and lower each day. It turns out it's a lot easier to lower the seaweed to the nutrients at night and have them soak up nitrate and phosphate and other nutrients, and then lift the platform up during the sunrise to absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. That's a lot easier than pumping 1 million cubic meters of seawater. There's a balance in terms of ecosystem restoration. A case can be made for upwelling instead of this deep cycling, but we do have squid eggs and sea turtles and game fish taking up residence around the platform as well. So that's the deep cycling that I was talking with you about. There are multiple ways of supplying the deep nutrients, but at night the platform drops down below the thermocline, below the nutricline, and absorbs nutrients. And at sunrise, it lifts up to the surface where it absorbs sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. We've had really great responses. The test results have been 100 to 300% growth per month for these red seaweeds. They're actually depicted in green, my apologies. And the control lines stayed at the surface and they didn't get the nutrients and they didn't grow very well at all. So we really do see a dramatic difference from 2020 through 2023. This work is continuing in 2024, and I'm very happy to say that we've just launched a 2,500 square meter, more than half an acre of marine permaculture with a more resilient marine permaculture platform than just last 12 months. So very happy to be running through the phases. We're now entering this phase 4 range of single stepping stone to an economically sustainable hectare. That's 10,000 square meters. And key benefits are not only the deep cycling of nutrients, but we actually did survive a Category 5 typhoon, tropical cyclone, hurricane in December 2021. And the platform not only remained intact at just 5 meters below the surface of the sea, but most of the seaweed was still growing, was still on the platform. And the day after the hurricane, we were growing seaweed again, and we were able to provide a 1/4 ton of seedlings to our neighboring farms that had total losses. And that was across the central Philippines. So these bowling balls, there are more and more hurricanes each time. Did you know that the Philippines, I think it was the Luzon area, experienced 6 landfalls of hurricanes in the last 4 weeks of this year?
Oh,
I mean, it's just astounding. And so literally those unhinged ocean temperatures that we've seen on LinkedIn and elsewhere are having a dramatic effect on the number of hurricanes and the hurricane intensity that is really substantial. So it's something that we need to build hurricane resilience into everything we do. It's accessible for millions of hectares of open ocean, actually up to 10 billion hectares. So it's really, that's just the Pacific Ocean, the subtropical, mostly empty ocean area. And so being able to regenerate the ecosystem services provided by kelp forests and other seaweed, tropical seaweed forests like this one is really key. And finally, about a quarter of the seaweed falls off the platform during growth and sinks 1,000 meters a day to the abyssal seafloor where it remains for centuries. And this is something we'd like to measure, like leaves falling from the trees. And that presents a true blue carbon sink that we're hoping to quantify. And we're very happy to be working with 4 universities on this right now. We did raise over $1 million in corporate funding support to actually measure the carbon cycling underneath this platform and be able to quantify that. So we're partnering right now with Princeton University, Rutgers, Scripps Institution of Oceanography, part of UCSD, and the National Taiwan University to quantify this, produce a peer-reviewed publication in about 18 months, and use that as a basis for a gold standard that we hope will make this work. Tanuja, one of the reasons I'm keen on biodiversity metrics is that if we
Mm,
can't quantify it, I would hope
mm,
that we could build a normative gold standard in the future for ecosystem services like biodiversity
mm,
increases. So that's part of the
mm,
reason. And I know Pam had expressed some concern about this, but I'm hoping that we could bring resources to these regenerative efforts using systems somewhat analogous perhaps to the gold standards that are being used today.
Brian, I
We've,
don't know if this is the right time to ask,
yeah,
but if I look at all of these, what I'm seeing is actions that need to be done to change something. What I'm trying to understand is what would the end state look like, and where's the financing going to come for this? Because it's financing here, this is not a market as such, right?
yes. Well, let's look at the finance question first and then come back
Okay.
to our efforts to, I'll just say in a nutshell, the we can document the pre-industrial levels of ecosystem services that existed in the oceans, in the seas, and the soils. Um, there are dramatic gaps that are occurring now because of the ocean warming that's taking place today. And that primarily one of the biggest gaps is the water's too warm and the nutrient levels are too low. And that's
Mm,
because ocean warming of the surface of the ocean presents a barrier to the upwelling, natural upwelling of nutrients that occurs. And that literally will result in a collapse of the seas and life in the seas because of the lack of primary production, as well as the fact that we've been doing a lot of overfishing in the past decades. So how do we
mm,
regenerate life in the ocean? And what we've identified is this nutrient value chain gap. And the question is, can we actually build a value chain? And of course, nature
mm,
measures, commerce in nature is done with nutrient flows. And so if we can't restore the supply of deep nutrients to the surface ocean, we're going to have the collapse will continue. And
mm,
really, so that's the gap that we're trying to address. It was human induced in this case by global warming.
mm,
But our challenge is to actually step in and give nature half a chance and she'll regenerate exponentially. And so really that's the key part is to understand. In fact, we've seen this, around our platform. I should show you a short movie later. That's a loop that runs in the background. But we've had thousands of sardines, hundreds of tuna, dozens of dolphins, and even a couple whale sharks show up underneath our platform, and we've been able to see that directly underneath our small platform. To me, that's the greatest vote of confidence. Nature's voting with her fins. She's saying, you've got the good stuff, and it's giving us a natural validation that we're heading in the right direction. And
that's
not only is
beautiful.
it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful
Oh,
validation.
thank you. Well, not only is it attracting fish, But I believe with the isotope studies that we're beginning now, we can actually demonstrate that we're growing more fish on the platform. And so that's the regenerative dimension, where you can actually demonstrate that we're helping to regenerate fish populations because of the fish habitat and the added food supply.
I think last year there was a news item that the waters off Florida had reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 37, 38 Celsius.
Yes,
And fish were dying and just being washed over to the beach. It was quite shocking, actually.
it is
So my
shocking.
question to you is, all of this work, this change work that needs to happen, should we go to, say, for example, tour companies or real estate companies who are building around there and saying, all of you need to contribute a piece to fund this change?
I
Is that
think
the
we
way
do
we should do it?
we do need that to do that kind of fundraising. We have some partners at Positive Polar that are hoping to do research expeditions to showcase this. But I have to highlight, it was only 6 months from the IMO intervention to cut all the Atlantic aerosols until we saw those 101-degree temperature differences in Florida. And I will add +5 degrees Celsius sea surface temperature anomalies in the North Sea. And I don't believe that's a coincidence. I actually, and from the research that James Hansen has been doing, the reason that we got 101-degree temperatures can be directly related to the cutoff of aerosols that occurred in January 2023. It was 6 months to see that outcome. Now, that's a negative experiment that the IMO
Right.
did, but it also points the way to how can we actually keep our planet on the road towards regeneration during the difficult years and decades to come. And that is, let's find natural biogenic ways of regenerating sea spray aerosols and biogenic kelp forest aerosols and everything else that can actually contribute to cooler temperatures. And the reason I care about this so much is the first coral reef I ever visited was the Sombrero Reef off Key Largo. And there's a New York Times audio podcast that I've got to point you to, August 2023, that is tear jerking. I mean, it's heart rendering. It's because that coral was so warm, they actually had a New York Times reporter on there while the NOAA people went out and looked at it, and they said, "Oh, it doesn't look bleached. We're really grateful." And then they go and dive on it, and it was so hot it didn't bleach. The corals just died.
Oh,
Coral, the coral, it's just like, you know, coral died. And so I haven't heard since that last year. But that's one of the reasons we want to do this expedition to the Great
yeah,
Barrier Reef next month
yeah.
to see what is the state of the corals. But it's to me, it was so saddening to know that most of the corals off the Florida Keys may be dead, but just because of this inadvertent experiment that we've done, massive geoengineering experiment. By the way, the Mediterranean aerosol cutoff on the sulfates is going to be May 2025. So we can predict right now the
What's
warming
going
and
to
the
happen?
unprecedented, storms over Valencia and all the rest of it. This is not a
Yeah,
coincidence. This is happening on our watch. And so
yeah.
that's how important these healthy, natural, biogenic aerosols need to be. We need to restore the brightness of our oceans and our seas and our soils. And that is best done, I think, by regenerating the marine clouds that existed pre-industrially, as evidenced by the NASA Ceres satellite and the Big Bear Solar Observatory. So those
Well,
are
we
some of
have come to the hour, and I don't quite know how
okay.
quickly we did this. Maybe we need another session. But I want to say, Brian,
Tanuja,
the IMO experiment, while it was a negative one, but it does say
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off in mid-sentence there. You want to finish your thought and then we'll come back. I just was thinking
two
we
and a
could,
half minutes to go,
okay, go for it.
that the nature speed of response can get us to where we need to go within 20 years.
Well, that's just
And let
it.
me
If it only takes 6 months to do a negative experiment, could we do in
exactly.
6 months a positive experiment if applied globally with policy frameworks that help regeneration? And that's what I would
Yeah.
look. And so actually, our vision for the future is to engage with local communities and actually put out a call for proposals to local communities that want to be part of the regeneration and say, look, this is what we're looking for. Communities that have a vision for the future, that want to show the way as to where we can go to lead the way on emissions to zero, on carbon removal, and on local climate repair that can actually help to keep our communities cool, keep our regions cool, and these local and regional rebrightening efforts could actually go a long way towards helping communities. And once we get a few communities going, we might see 1,000 communities that begin this. And fortunately, when it comes to this kind of marine cloud rebrightening, if you will, it can be done locally. It can be done in a decentralized way, community by community. And I would love to find 1,000 community regenerators and 1,000 communities of regeneration that we might just sponsor through GRC and other and the Climate Foundation.
Fantastic. And we have Colleen already who is willing to sign up. So Colleen, you can reach out to Brian both on LinkedIn and GRC. It's Slack, I think, right?
Yeah.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to, we're all near. There you go.
Colleen,
That was a lot of information.
did you talk to Brian afterwards?
I've actually talked to him several times prior, actually. Yeah, he and Neil Spackman and I have had several conversations on how our projects literally cover the earth. Neil's projects on the coastlines, and I don't do a whole lot with cities, but for rural developments and whatever, our project really works well. So, if we can, we've spent most of the last month creating a new website for nonprofit. I'm trying to figure out how to raise a little bit of money so that we can afford to do the legal work. We feel like, we have a lot of experience setting up corporations. And as far as just filing with the state is concerned, we feel adequate. But in terms of filing with the IRS, I feel like I need a tax attorney to work with us on that I can afford.
Oh, they can afford. Because I gave you the name of a great one.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. We have found a gentleman that works at Curtin and McConkie, which is a large law firm, and they're willing to do the work for us for about $10,000. So I'm just trying to figure out how to put that together right now, and then we can move forward with getting that filed. The big problem that we have with that, and the reason we feel a little bit inadequate, is that we already have 3 existing corporations that have different parts of the puzzle to work on, and because we're doing an entire community, and my team has decided that really what we should be doing maybe is to consider ourselves an educational institution primarily.
Yes, good.
And as and just say, okay, we're raising, because when you look at it, universities are an intentional community. Honestly, they are, right? And so all of these other functions that we have are in service to the educational capacity. Even the hospitality aspect of it is to teach people how to do hospitality. So as an ecosystem issue. Because right now hospitality, we talk about ecotourism and things like that, that is still pretty carbon intensive with all the travel and everything involved. But we'll just, that's where we are on that. And but I think it's really important if we can do what is necessary. My biggest problem right now is I have a lot of people who are interested in talking to me who have technological solutions. And I'm like, okay, but your technological solution doesn't really solve the issue that we're working on, which is to get the land functioning, that the entire ecosystem needs to be functioning, not just have a, kind of a workaround for some particular part of it.
Colleen, I tell you, I'm gonna pick up on what you just said because frankly, I have a feeling that what Brian is proposing as interesting and short-term successful as it appears, two things come up for me. One is, what are the unintended consequences of this? In the same way that the getting rid of aerosols created unintended consequences, inquiring systems and our founder, his passion was understanding the unintended consequences, thinking things through. And that resonated so strongly with me personally that from day one, we clicked. And this reminds me, it gives me kind of the same feeling that recycling gives me.
Yeah.
Is it
Well,
just
it's a place to start, but it's
no, that's
unless it's
bullshit. I'm gonna call that bullshit.
well,
Because
I mean, if you
it
at
is-
least, I mean, they're gathering certain kinds of information that I think is interesting.
well,
But the
fine.
thing,
It's
I mean,
interesting.
all of these things can be a piece of the puzzle. The problem is working out the relationships among them so that it works. Now, we're going to recycle in our communities, but that recycling will be done within a natural setting. It's not, I mean, we're not going to be trying to gather up everybody's plastics. We're going to try and do without plastic. And so everything else that is, I mean, all the kitchen scraps and everything, they're going to go right into where the animals are, and where they're going to go into compost. I mean, so it's just if you're going to be doing these things, you have to look at the entire system, and that's what's not being done.
And I really wonder, I wonder, first of all, I recognize how difficult it is, especially at the level Brian's trying to operate at. I mean, to understand the full implications of very, very difficult, no question about it. But it is not attending to the real problem. I mean, your sentence that you said right before I interjected was perfect. Yeah, that's all interesting, but you're not really attending to the actual problem. I really, I, I really do find, it frustrating. I really do. I'm at a point where I'm just sitting around and talking ad nauseum, hours, all of the hours and time of his brilliant mind, going into a limited at best that is just trying to keep the existing system going, is just my plate is so full right now, and the idea I really almost need to to go. I love you all, but I find it, I really, when you think it through, how does it actually help if we do not do everything else, Colleen, that you're talking about?
Yeah,
So-
well, and getting people to think about whole systems is difficult. Yeah, I mean, and especially the moneyed people. Moneyed people got there by focusing
The
on a
systems work just
vertical.
fine for them, don't
And
they?
now you're talking about, an entire system and that's out of balance. And and that's the whole thing. The whole idea of balance is foreign to so many people.
Yeah.
Um,
So let me interject complex system language here, just, because that's my thing, right? So, Colleen, you said it without using complex system language. You say it's not just the thing itself and it's all the pieces, sure, but it's how they're related that makes it happen. You use the word make it happen. And what happens? It emerges. The system self-organizes and something emerges. And nowhere in any of our consideration, whether it's in the science or it's in the governance or it's in policy or even in the philosophy of it, is anyone looking at that emergent level.
Because
And
it's
yet,
very hard to imagine what's going to emerge because
yes,
it's a
yes,
creative emergence that is unknowable almost until it
it
happens.
is non-linear and so complex, right? But also we have never done this in our history.
And it's also a completely foreign track
Yes.
in our brain.
So, but we need to interject here just a bit of humility in the sense that we don't know how to get there. So
Yes.
any design that we create, whether it is Brian's Climate Foundation or anywhere else, that design itself must have a high degree of learning and adaptation built into it.
Where the unintended consequences are thought through as much as possible. Is that what you're saying?
And then, yes, but also you kind of project a certain unintended consequence. And if it doesn't happen, you have to go back to your theory and say, what did I miss here?
Right.
So that loopy thing, it needs to be. And once again, that thing we don't really do.
Correct. And simultaneously, it sends out vibes to for-profit moneymakers that, they can keep on over-consuming, over-utilizing because, hey, we've got solutions well at hand. And that to me is the central problem, is that it sends the message that life is going to be able to continue as normal.
The way it is.
And so overconsumption, over extraction, all of that just keeps right on going. And so my solution for some time has been to get out of the way, allow it to naturally collapse. Mark.
Something that, like I've said before, that I'd like to draw attention to here is that when we're talking about, a flourishing world, a sustainable world, stable climate, etc., I've said this maybe hundreds of times here, it requires humans living in full relationship with the living world system, which means to say, as that comes about, we develop the consciousness that matches and is coherent with that. And so why I say this in this moment is like that consciousness development is a journey in of itself, because most of us have been, despite being different to many, we're still brought up in a predominantly mechanistic consciousness culture. And so it's pretty much impossible for us to not take on some of that. And why I want to point to living systems consciousness is because that is the answer, period. Like, we don't have, we can know that already, and we don't have to like say, well, it might be, it's a theory that we need to have that. Like, it is sort of definitional when it comes to a species being part of the living world system. And so if we start there, and then we commit to saying, well, if we want to be part of bringing about, you know, humans initially in small pockets, but ultimately all of us living in relationship with the living world system, which is what we must be doing for flourishing, then our job is to be developing that consciousness. And so, like, I offer one framework to support that, but, you know, it's just a framework. It doesn't really matter. It's just a translator or a pointing to what is fundamentally true about the living world system. And why I say this is because it's quite a different approach when we make that commitment to being guided by living systems with a deep knowing that we must. And when we do things and they don't work, it's not because the universal patterns of living systems aren't appropriate for it. It's just that our consciousness of that isn't developed enough yet. And so this work that we're doing is about supporting us to be developing that consciousness with a deep knowing that it will be in the direction of health, because that is what living systems consciousness supports us to do. And so maybe tangibly coming back to this particular example that Brian's leading, without specifically making an assertion as to how much living systems consciousness is behind it, what we can say is that this approach has embedded energy in it and embedded resources in it. And for this approach to ultimately move us towards flourishing, it must be a good use of those limited energy and material resources, one. And then two, it must also be at some point supporting human systems change. Because if human systems don't change, then we don't have a hope in hell. Yeah, maybe I've said enough, but like there is a understanding of the living world system that is available, that we can be learning in this work. And as we learn it and get to a sufficient level, we as an individual human or a group of humans, we can at some point start to take our very first fully living in systems informed and human systems changing actions,
We've lost your sound.
Oh, I can hear him. I think
Yes.
it might be you.
Just to say the last bit, I think I still have it. As we start to take those living systems informed and human systems changing actions, like the very first one that we might take, like that's when we're starting to create the possibility for the future we want. And until then, we are doing our inner journey to get to doing that outer work that makes a difference in human systems and in humanity. So that was in response to the
That was
mixture
actually great.
today.
That really, what you shared was great.
So, a slight caveat, if I might add, even the internal journey is done through external resources. So if you look at any spiritual, because we can't sort of go into our heads and just fix a few screws, and now our consciousness is where it needs to be. So any spiritual practice that you take in any system will tell you, you need to eat this or not eat this, wake up at this time or this or whatever. And these are all external tools that develop the internal space. So the two are not separate things, internal and external. So I like to think of this as our actions are external, but they must be founded on a consciousness that is underlying everything.
Yes, and to that end, being conscious of the amount of external resources you're drawing in, and recognizing, you know, if you're doing more harm than good, put simply, is it?
Yeah.
And with recycling, we know we're doing more harm than good, period.
Yeah. I really think that this narrowing down to single point solutions like recycling or the
Or
coral
like
reefs.
Brian's.
Yeah, coral reefs. I think that is one, because we don't have the know-how, the relational know-how, how to create a more systemic solution.
Absolutely, and that's what Mark just said, is that it's
Yes.
gonna take a systemic solution. We know what that solution is. It's living system consciousness. And everything until we get there is doing our internal work, using external resources in order to get to where we're actually moving forward in a living systems consciousness.
Remember, if we had all reached living systems consciousness now, we still need to act at the level of coral reefs and water temperatures and all that. So that doesn't change, That doesn't change.
The thing is people don't know what to do.
Yes.
It's not that there isn't good motivation. I mean, most people would do better if they knew how to do it.
If they understand.
And so people say, well, why do you want to do your villages? And because it's a demonstration of how to do it. And it is the smallest microcosm. I mean, that's the thing, I mean, people can say, what about scalability and all that kind of thing? Well, I don't talk about scalability. I talk about adaptability. So here again, it's a matter of how do you get this thing to go into some sort of sense of dynamic balance? And how do people live within that dynamic balance? I mean, all we have done in the last 100 years is shield ourselves from this dynamic balance. We live in air-conditioned houses with artificial lights and everything's square, and and we wonder why people are wanting to commit suicide. It's because we're so far out of our natural habitat.
Yep.
And the whole idea is how do we imagine human habitat within a natural setting? And then how do people behave? What do you do? What are your habit patterns? That's what it has to be changed at that level, not just of understanding, but actual change of habit patterns, of how we conduct our lives. And it was really odd where I kind of came to this recognition. I was seeing this livestock management system, and then it sort of took it from a 40,000-foot level view of it, and I thought, my gosh, that feedlot looks like a city. Well, why, why are we worried about cow farts when when human beings are living in feedlots? Because cities are feedlots for humans. And it really, you can't have any sort of natural ecosystem balance sense if you're living in a feedlot. You just can't. It's just not there. So I don't know how we,
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
how we shift this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing everything I know to do, and I feel good about the direction we're going with a nonprofit. But here again, I don't know politically what's going to happen in the next little while that may either favor or disfavor what we're thinking. So we'll just have to wait and see how some of that plays out.
Yeah. So let me just interject a comment before I hand it over to you, Nikki. The spiritual thinker Ram Dass said that in urban locations, children are born and grow up in 100% or nearly 100% human-made environment. So what they see every day is cars and roads and buildings, which are all human-made. So when humans look at human-made things, ideas of competition, ideas of mine is better than yours, us versus them kind of thing comes up. Now, conversely, a child growing up on a farm sees trees and plants, and he doesn't go to a tree or a plant and say, I don't like your leaves. Why can't you make it better? See, so that state of mind where there is even a space that is non-judgmental is decreasing in urban spaces. I mean, that's fundamental. So, Nikki,
Yeah.
over to you.
Well, I wanted to ask about clarification on cities as feedlots, like specifically that statement, because I'm slightly confused about that. Like coming from Los Angeles, I'm fully aware that the vast majority of businesses here are restaurants. So I get that that maybe that's the correlation. But then I also wanted to what you said, Tanuja, the Ram Dass thing, like it's interesting because it just gave me a moment of like, oh hey, I did something right as a mother because I did homesteading with my kids and they had to help grow their food and they had to help take care of animals and we homeschooled and lived along a river and things like that. So I appreciated you saying that because sometimes my sometimes my brain just needs a little gold star, even though Carol Sanford said we shouldn't have them anymore. But anyway, thank you for saying that. But I am wanting clarification on the feedlot statement, like humans living in feedlots called cities.
Colleen, would you like to take that? You're on mute, by the way.
I don't really know how to even start,
Well, for what
honestly.
what comes up for me, Colleen, is that no food is grown in there. So all the food is dumped into it. And and so that's when you first made that comment months or years ago, that's what came up for me. And so I sort of just think of it as, it's not a regenerative place. It whatever it needs is trucked in, and so people are in essence living artificially in an area because they couldn't naturally survive there unless food and water were trucked in, and living whatever housing, etc. So does that start to address it?
Yeah, well, it does. But the other thing is the way humans interact with each other is very different within cities than it is in the countryside. There's something about density that and I became aware of this when we were traveling to Canada. We were up in Nova Scotia, and it was like there were and visitors would come at certain times of the year there, and everyone wanted to come out and meet the visitors. And I'm like, oh, great. We get to do some local color here while we're visiting, and we get to meet the people and talk to the people. And it was when people live in crowded conditions, they isolate themselves. They close the doors, and and people who are living in the countryside are excited to get together, and so it changes the way the human relationships operate as well. So people are trying to protect themselves from other humans in cities. In the countryside, they're trying to connect with other humans. And that's a very different kind of mentality. So I think
I
that
agree.
that's part of it too,
I agree. I agree. So we've reached the hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this discussion. Yeah, so I'd love to think about solutions as we go forward.
Well, and building on this idea of the Capra and the living systems, I think if it's where I'm sort of at, is the vein I want to continue thinking in, is like, how do we move forward in that line of thinking? I'm feeling, like I said, my bandwidth is so narrow as far as free space at the moment, but I'm moving, and so as soon as I moved and get myself set up in my new place, and the new year comes, I think I will be back to normal, and to just, I guess where I'm at is I just don't tend to have a lot of time or patience for big things that aren't sort of grounded in at least moving forward. As generous as your comment is, Mark, about, well, you're just doing your internal work to get there, I really want to be moving forward and not, these sideways, as valuable, I'm sure, as Brian's work is in the moment. I don't want to discount that, I'm sure, because the old system is in place.
So reminding everyone, we are meeting next week, and then that is our last meeting until January 14. Next week, we will discuss results or comments from COP29. Please bring something bright to drink, because I doubt that the comments will be very positive. So something to keep yourself up and feeling positive. Maybe a little teddy bear.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
That's right. So yeah, so hope to see you next week.
All
And
right.
thank you for the session.
Thank you for this session. And Mark, please continue